Welcome to Acton in Focus. I'm Vivian Kopsinger-Birchall, your host, and yet again, I'm hosting the amazing Congresswoman Lori Trahan, who is going to give us some updates about what's going on. But to start, welcome, Congresswoman.
Oh, thank you, Vivian. Thanks for having me back. It's great to see you.
Great to see you as well. And so there's a lot that is happening right now. I don't even know where to start. But if you may, what are some of the updates that are happening in your office that you'd like us to know?
Yeah, well, it's been a pretty productive Congress, and I'll just sort of back up and say, look, I ran to represent the 3rd district back in 2018, the first time I ever ran for office, because I wanted to make the district that I've called home even better. I was born here, raised here. I'm now raising my family here, and I go to work every single day with the goal of making sure that the families that I represent have the support and the opportunities they need to make and build a better life. And that's why I supported legislation to help get families and small businesses the relief they needed through the pandemic. It's why I helped pass legislation to rebuild our infrastructure. And it's why I'm working around the clock to lower prices from everything from prescription drugs to home heating and utility bills. And we do have a lot of work ahead of us, but I am laser focused on delivering, for the people I'm privileged to serve. There's been so much since we've last talked. Of course, the American Rescue Plan, which helped reopen our schools, get shots in arms, just get our economy back to where it was reopened. Certainly, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is delivering, well over $9 billion to the state of Massachusetts, $12 million to improve the intersection at Kelly's Corner in Acton, but so much more: our bridges, our roads, our water infrastructure, and our public transit here in the Commonwealth. And then we've also worked hard right before we broke for lowering prescription drug prices. The Inflation Reduction Act finally gives Medicare the ability to negotiate the prices. It caps out-of-pocket costs for our seniors at $2,000, caps the price of insulin at $35, while making the largest investment in energy, alternative energy, and climate change that we've ever made in our country. So we have a lot to talk about, and we didn't even get to touch on the CHIPS and Science Act, but I really look forward to your questions because there's a lot to break down for folks.
Absolutely. We'll start with the inflation. You mentioned the Inflation Act. Right now, I think in the community, everyone is feeling the pinch of inflation. And what has been your observation? What has been some of the concerns in your constituency? And what are some of the other ways that we can help the community recover at household levels?
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's no question that folks are encountering larger prices at the grocery store. Gas pump, luckily, we've been able to bring down again. But, when I hear Eversource and National Grid talk about increases in home heating and electric bills this winter, it has everybody on edge. I know I grew up in a family that if any one of our bills had increased, it would have been devastating for our family. And so, we have to do everything that in our power to reduce the prices that we have control over. And so the prescription drug prices and healthcare premiums and prices, so important to our hardworking families. And those were covered in the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll say one thing that we did right at the end of September was we increased the home heating assistance, the LIHEAP fund, $160 million coming to the state of Massachusetts. That is an increase over what we normally get. We added $1 billion nationally to that fund. And so we need to make sure that people don't have to make those really difficult trade-offs between, putting food on the table and paying those bills. But another thing that, I'm working with Representative Custer from New Hampshire to really, put a full court press on the administration, getting them to release our reserves in New England for home heating oil. When we increase that supply, we help drive down those costs for families. And so, whether it's, the the gas prices, the food prices, our prescription drugs, our healthcare, our utility bills, really just working and laser focused on decreasing those costs for families.
Right. Just to piggyback on that, home heating, you've mentioned we're getting into the colder months of the year. And, some of the residents who suffer from, the lack of heating are in apartment buildings. And there hasn't really been a great structure for renters and apartment dwellers to access some of these services. What is some advice you have for renters?
Yeah, so there are community action agencies that cover all of our communities. Community Teamwork is one, has a broad coverage area so that help families who can't afford those high electric bills or heating those gas bills this winter. And so that's exactly what LIHEAP is there to provide, is that assistance. And we passed a plus up on that so that we had more assistance available for folks, especially as we start the winter months. But we're going to be at it again. There's no question that when we do the budget at the end of the year that we're going to be looking at another plus up, because it's here in New England we have 6 months of winter, and so we have to get folks through the winter. And so for some families they may not hit that threshold. I think for a Massachusetts family on average of 4, it's $81,000. But we also know that those heating costs are going to hurt our middle class families as well, folks who make above that threshold. And so that's the reason why you've seen the president take certain steps in the National Reserve and making sure that we're releasing those. And here in New England, we have our own reserve. We hold 1 million barrels. We'd like to increase that, to more 1 to 4 million barrels, so that we can be a bit more in control of that supply, which will drive those costs down. But for the time being, making sure that we release those reserves so that everybody, so we mitigate the increase that folks see in their bills is what we're focused on.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And then I'm going to drag us back to the infrastructure development. I know you've been doing a lot of work to improve infrastructure, especially like in Acton, where I live. But most recently, unfortunately, we've had some tragic incidences on the roads. And there's a lot of concern, even this morning on social media, about the safety on our roads. Could you just expound more on what the infrastructure, I know that you've secured funding for Kelly's Corner, but we have other state roads that are dangerous. People have lost their lives most recently. What's your vision for us?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, over the next 5 years, we're going to see our infrastructure transformed. We're going to see, improvements to Route 2, to 495, to all those major roadways that people rely on to travel, to get their kids to school, to get themselves to work. So we're not spending so much time, in our cars. But I think alongside that, we have a lot of smaller communities that just need intersections improved, right? We don't have proper signage. They're not wide enough. Maybe they're not lighted. There's not a pedestrian walkway or a bike lane. So there is a lot of money that's coming to the state of Massachusetts to help with those improvements, right? Making our streets safer. Certainly the investment in public transportation, we know Massachusetts needs an overhaul, whether we're talking about the MBTA, but also in our commuter rail, making sure we have electric buses so that we're not, we're doing what we need to do to make investments in smarter vehicles, and we're protecting our planet. And then a big one that I hear, overall, like no matter what community I'm in, my large gateway cities or my smaller towns is sewage, whether it's combined sewage overflows, water infrastructure, PFAS mitigation, groundwater filtration. We need to make sure that we're upgrading our water infrastructure because sometimes it inhibits our ability for economic development. And so these are long-standing projects. They've been deferred for too long. The federal government hasn't invested in local infrastructure the way it had, decades before. And so we're playing catch up. But really what we want to do is make sure that we're providing a better quality of life to all our communities, making our streets much safer, and also building, sustainable and resilient communities in the process, which this law has baked in. I'll say one thing that often doesn't get talked about, in the infrastructure bill is what we need to do with our supply chain, making sure, coming out of the pandemic that we were using every lever possible to unclog that supply chain so that the flow of goods, was coming to the United States and that we weren't paying higher prices as a result of those, delays and shortages. And then on top of that, the CHIPS and Science Act, which we passed in August, is going to be instrumental in bringing manufacturing home. No question during COVID, I think we were all just appalled at how reliant we were on a foreign supply chain. And in that context, it was around getting PPE and life-saving equipment to our healthcare workers, our frontline workers, our hospitals. But even now, we don't make chips in the United States anymore, and that needs to change. That has increased the price of washers and dryers and cars and everything that we use. So the push to bring things back to being made in America is one that I've been for since coming to Congress, and I think Massachusetts, and in particular the 3rd District, is really poised to take advantage of, because we once did design and manufacture chips in this part of the state, and I think we will again real soon.
Absolutely. And, it's exciting to hear you talking about, the whole components, all the components of economic development. I know you're a strong supporter of local businesses and small businesses, which are the engine of our local towns here. And, just connected to that, connected to transportation as well. One of the things that is lacking is actually public transportation that meets that 1 mile. And because people, if you don't have private cars or the cars being used by the person who goes to work, then we have a population that is not interacting with our local businesses, with our communities. There's mental health because of isolation. So yes. What are some of your visions, or if there's a vision for improving that 1 mile distance? Yeah,
we're already seeing now. So many of our communities and even our regional transit authorities, use the American Rescue Plan dollars to make sure that we were improving access to transportation. Certainly, I think the long-term plan is to have a major upgrade in our public transportation here in Massachusetts and frankly across New England. Anybody who has traveled overseas has seen how that can just improve the economy, a community, and just access for people. I mean, we talk a lot about making sure that we leave nobody behind in our recovery from COVID. Transportation and housing in particular are central to that. And so, with the $2 billion that Massachusetts, and that's just the formulaic funds, never mind the competitive grants that we'll be eligible for, we're going to see upgrades in our commuter rail and our regional transit authorities. Certainly, to our all aspects of our public transportation. And look, we need to make it so that we're not just thinking about commuting to work, right? Because work has changed a lot, right? We do have to think about how people can get from community to community, how they can support our small businesses, how they can access the services they need, whether that's in a hospital or a counseling center. And so I think having a very broad vision of what that looks like, not just in Boston, by the way, right? A lot of what, I do with my colleagues in the Mass delegation is talk about how this needs to affect and impact the entire state. So I'm really excited. I think we need to think big. Of course, this is a major investment, one that our country hasn't seen in decades, and we need to use these funds properly and in a way that's going to catapult us into the 21st century, certainly, and beyond.
Absolutely. And Congresswoman, in the past year, we have seen the impact of, leaders who really take certain rights for granted. And you're in Congress right now. We have witnessed the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which affects women's reproductive health. What have you observed, and how can the community support your office to make sure that we at least maintain the human rights provisions that we have and get back women's rights?
Yes, it's such an important question. And I know it's on the minds of everybody I talk to. I mean, certainly the economy is always emphasized as we head into an election season. But I think really what has caused a lot of anxiety for people like you and like me and so many others is the fact that we're bringing our country in the opposite direction of where we want. We've fought so hard to get to this point where women have access and control over the healthcare that they need and the ability to make decisions about their body with their doctor and their family. And look, I know sometimes we talk in Massachusetts because we have the laws on the books that we need to protect and preserve those rights. But, elections matter. And we've heard from way too many Republicans down in Washington that the first chance they get, they will institute a national ban on abortion, and that will be devastating, not just to the states that are living that trauma right now, but also to states like ours. And so it's really important that we keep this front and center. I have two little girls. They're 8 and 12 years old, and I think every day about how they could live with less rights than I do. And that's actually the experience for too many young girls in states across this country. And so we need to do everything in our power to make sure that we we codify Roe, and we reverse Dobbs, and we can do that legislatively. We need the people in Washington with the courage to do it. But there's a lot else at stake here. We know that right now we were just handed down the Dobbs decision, which has everybody sort of leaning in, I think, to this election. But, same-sex marriage, access to contraception, voting rights. I mean, we need to make sure that the progress that we have made, that we protect with all of our might. And that's going to take every single one of us.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for the work you do. I also have two little girls, 8 and 10. And so this was so dear to my heart as well. That's why I snuck that question in. But back to, what are some of the key achievements your office has registered in the past year since we last spoke that you'd want our community to know? And maybe also to mention, we talked about Kelly's Corner in general, but what does this infrastructure project also mean to our community and to Massachusetts?
Yeah, well, look, the Kelly's Corner is set to receive, $12 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law. We announced that earlier this year. It's important that we transform it into a walkable and community hub. I mean, that funding is going to improve safety and accessibility for pedestrians and cyclists, and stormwater management as well, while it reduces traffic. And I get to see it in person when I visited it earlier this year. But across our district, there's going to be long overdue projects like Kelly's Corner, and they're finally going to get prioritized with this investment. And so, look, over the next 5 years, we're going to see those investments made. For us, I could name so many projects. When I was growing up in Lowell, there was a temporary bridge that was built 40 years ago. It's been a temporary bridge. That bridge is going to get replaced with $188 million, brand new bridge, which is so long overdue. And that's happening in Haverhill, in Fitchburg, in Lawrence, in Marlborough, in communities all across the district. And so that was probably the easiest vote I ever cast on the House floor, because, I talk a lot about sewage overflow and how that really, it pollutes our rivers. It affects our drinking water, and making sure that we upgrade those water systems is so important, especially when you live in a state like Massachusetts, where the infrastructure is really old. And so even when I first got to Congress, I was talking about sewage. I had the Stop Sewage Overflow Act that I worked on with Darren LaHood, a Republican from Illinois. And that piece of legislation made it into the infrastructure bill, which is going to be transformative for towns who cannot afford those types of investments. You know, the feds are going to step in and make sure that they're done. Certainly PFAS has been a major issue across so many of the smaller communities in our district, and making sure that we get PFAS out of our water, out of our drinking water, you know, once and for all. We're seeing incredible technologies even coming out of UMass Lowell to help us with that. And so when you deliver that funding to a public research institution, a world-class research institution like UMass Lowell, and they work with community stakeholders, you feel the effects immediately. And so I'm excited that we've been able to take a problem, and we've been able to craft legislation to solve that problem, because it's going to, give basic rights to folks, right? Everybody wants to have the assurance that the water that they're drinking is clean and safe, and this bill is going to help that. I'll say, a big part of, I'm on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and I spend a lot of time in healthcare. Mental health wellness is a big issue. It always has been, but there's no question that COVID exacerbated that issue for our young people, for our frontline workers, for our seniors who were isolated for those 2 years. And so we need to invest in the programs that we know work. And I've been a huge proponent of funding those programs, making sure that we're getting funding to our school districts so that they can talk to kids, taking the stigma out, and making sure that we've got suicide awareness programs and places for people to get the help that they need. And we're going to continue that, because we're just seeing, the tip of the iceberg in terms of, the mental health issues that are kind of coming out of COVID specifically. So we'll be at that for years to come. And then the other one is, holding big tech accountable. I mentioned my daughters. We don't have age-appropriate guidelines in our country the way the EU does. We don't even have a privacy policy that governs our country and puts guardrails around big tech. So I've been working on those issues. I think there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that's out there that leads to violence, frankly. It leads to January 6th. It leads to an attack on Speaker Pelosi. And we really need to make sure that we're holding big tech accountable for the spread of those lies, but also making sure that we protect people's data, that people have options. They're not reading these long, convoluted terms of service and that they don't understand and just clicking the box because they have no choice. We have to put control back in consumers' hands. And so, and also, while we're talking about mental health, we know that social media platforms contribute to, mental health illness, especially with our young women. And so we really need to have a privacy policy. We need to protect our children online, and we need to put guardrails around big tech so that it's not business as usual and them, sort of raking in these big profits at the expense of everyday Americans.
Congresswoman, I can't thank you enough for pointing out all those issues, for working on all those issues, because they are the core of our well-being as a humanity, as a community. And really, I know you're a very busy woman. I will not hold you a lot, but I look forward to hosting more and more conversations with you. But for now, I really, really wanted to thank you for spending it, taking the time to speak with us as a community, to give us updates on what's going on. One final question that is so easy is when you're after a very long day or long week, what do you like to do to recharge?
Oh, that is a great question, and it is an easy question. I recharge with my family like so many other people do. My kids are at a great age right now, and they're 8 and 12, and they're young girls, and they've got lots of questions. But really, what they just want is to have me home, and I don't know how much longer that's going to last, Vivian. But that is exactly how I recharge my batteries. I come home with them, we have a meal, we talk about our week or our day, and we just check in with each other to make sure everyone's doing all right. I sometimes, the world can feel a little bit heavy, but there's no question that, you sort of get your motivation, you get your inspiration from your home. At least I do, and I'm so thankful that I can. Right now, I'm home, campaigning. The election is next Tuesday, and it has been great to spend some time, not just with my family, but also reconnecting with folks across the 37 communities that I represent. I've always said that the job is here. Of course, I cast important votes and I take part in important, policy making down in Washington, but the job is here, listening to people, elevating, their concerns, things that they've pointed out and given, great input into things that we need to be focused on and working hard on. And so it's been nice to be home, and not just with my kids and my husband, but also with the people I'm so privileged to represent. So thank you.
No, thank you so much for all the work that you do again. And it's always a pleasure hosting you on this show.
Oh, thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Till next time.